Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about refactoring and when you should change your approach. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, Frederick, so there was a subscriber that said that he had to change 30 files to change when he updated the implementation of a button. But from your perspective, at what number of files is it too much to change? Is it over 5 or over 10? I am a junior software developer with no industry working experience. So what I interpret your words as being, basically what you're saying to me is like how many files would be too many? Because if you're going to change a button and that cascades to multiple other files and you have to update those files, how many files are too much? So if 30 was too much, is 5 okay? Or like under 5 or under 10 or something like that? That's what I'm taking away from what you're saying. So this is an example of when what I like to, and even if you did not tell me that you were a junior software developer, I would immediately, based on your question, understand that you are a junior software developer, because the thing that you're asking about is it's basically a question which indicates that you've never faced the sort of problems that come from having a lot of duplication in your code base and a lot of different permutations in your code base. Now, you may have heard someone say dry or don't repeat yourself. Now, the dry principle is one of the cornerstones in the value system of software developers, usually in all of IT, I would say. And the idea behind it is that with a lot of duplication, you need to track down each permutation of, in this case, a button, and update that in order to be sure that you did not cause any type of inconsistencies or things like that. And so I like to say that a better question here is that if you feel, can you feel safe that if you change only in one file of those 30 files, will the feature still work as intended? Because that's the key, right? If you're changing the text of the button, well, then you're going to have to unless then depending on how the code looks now, right? You could potentially have to change all those 30 files because each button is going to have a slightly different text or something like that. But that's not a problem. Because it's a little bit inconvenient. Maybe you could probably refactor that a little bit to make it more dry, but it's not really an issue because the feature is still working. And even if let's say that it was just in that one file you needed to change the text where the button was being used, and all the other places where the button is being used, well, they are still using the same text. They don't have to, you're not trying to, basically the thing I'm telling you is that if all of these 30 files contain the same feature requirement, in other words, the button is supposed to be the same button in all 30 files, but you have to go to each of those files and cascade any change that you made to all the other ones, then you have a problem. That's when you're not being dry. Because now, every time you want to change something in one place, the expectation is from the stakeholder, or like the feature, that every one of those buttons is being taken care of in the same way. And that's a problem. And that's where things like unit testing and visual regression testing come into play, where these are things that you should definitely be doing if you want to deal with now in this specific case it's just a button, but it works at a larger, a bigger concept than that. So when you change the button in one place, if you're using something like unit testing, for example, then ideally, if you change the behavior of the button, you should have unit tests to tell you if you broke it in some other place of the code. And if, let's say that you changed the visuals of the button, let's say you changed the color or something like that in one file, well, then you should have visual regression tests, ideally, for all the different features, like all the cases where you see this button, and they should break if something unforeseen happened. Because if the expectation is that, well, if you change the color of the button, it should cascade to all of the places, well, then all your tests are going to break. But if you change it in one file, and the expectation is that they should all be updated, and none of the other tests break, well, then you have a problem. Because the test that you broke, well, that's just one place. Then that means that you have a lot of duplication, because Well, basically you changed the button in one file. It's supposed to be used in the same way for all the other places, but it's not, because the tests are not breaking. That's a problem. So that's why I think that, I would say don't kill yourself over what I'm saying right now, because it can vary. I'm just assuming here now that you probably never even heard about visual regression testing, or like maybe even unit testing, and that's okay. Being a beginner, like everybody starts out somewhere. So what I would suggest to you is to try to understand this fundamental thing, and that is that it's not so much about how many files do I have to change in order to update this button. It's about, can I trust that if I change one file, that my feature is still working as intended? Or is it that if I changed just one file out of these 10 or 5 or 20 files or whatever, then I fixed my problem for that one scenario, but all the other ones, they are still broken because they're still using the old version of my button? If you can answer that question and figure out which one is correct, because in one scenario you might actually, the intention might be that you should have all these other files with a different version of the button because they're not supposed to be the same button, and then changing in one place still makes the feature work. Like the feature is still working because the others are not supposed to change. In other words, like if you were to create a situation where all the buttons change when you change in one file, well then you actually caused the regression. You're dry, but you actually create a problem, because the expectation, as an example, if you have one button that shows a primary color and then an error button, and that's the same button, and you change the primary color to something else, and then the error button changes color as well, that's a problem, because now you broke the error button. So that's the thing that you need to understand. You don't focus so much on files, like how many files are we talking about, things like that, when you're talking about being dry or things like that. Think about the feature itself. Is it working? If you change in one place, are you certain that all the other places that have an identical use case, are they being updated, yes or no? And are you certain that if you change that one file, that the places where it's not supposed to be updated, well, they stay the same? That is what the dry principle is in essence about. So what I want you to take away from this is that if you're scared that you have a lot of duplication, or like if you have a bad implementation and you're not being dry or things like that, try to stop thinking so much about the number of files that you have to update in order to be dry. Focus instead on making sure that you can answer this question. If I change one thing, and that thing is supposed to be the same thing for a lot of other places, am I certain, do I know that that change cascaded to all the other places? Or do I have to go to each of those places after I've done the change in the first place and do the same thing over and over? Do I have to repeat myself? Do you see what I'm saying? And if that's the case, then you're not being very dry. But it's not either correct to always say, well, I'm just going to connect all my things together so that if I change one thing, then all the things change together, because some of those things might not be supposed to change, as with the error button. If you change one button, the color from, I don't know, from blue to green or something like that, well, the error button should still be red. So you can't connect the error button together with the other button. You can't have the same button. That doesn't make sense. So you need to be able to understand the feature. That's what I'm after. Have a great day.